Ladies, gentlemen, and exiles of all ages, it's one of those lovely times of the week where I'm here to talk about some builds in Path of Exile 2. This time continuing our semi-regular check-in on what the best builds are looking like for each ascendancy, at least the ones I've seen so far. By the nature of the concept of a best build and the fact that the developers are all on break for the holidays, there will be a number of very similar builds still at the top for each class. However, some of them have had fairly large changes, entirely new builds entering the spotlights for them, and others have just had smaller updates or changes to their previously best builds, making them even stronger. As usual for this type of video where I'm showing other people's builds, we will have the original creator on screen so that you can find them if you want to know more about their setup, ask any questions, or just praise the person who made the build to begin with for their awesome idea. First up then, let's talk about the Titan Ascendancy, and not too much has changed with the best build for this in the last few days, even after the nerfs that made Armor Explosion not be able to break armor and trigger itself infinitely, Stampede with Armor Explosion, the Devastate support gem to break armor on heavy stun, and then just crushing blows from the ascendancy nodes to heavy stun primed enemies, and then using Herald of Ash as a spirit skill on top to just completely take care of clearing larger groups of enemies with the overkill damage. And obviously it's not quite as smooth as the movement from some other ascendancy's top builds, and its clear has gotten a little bit uglier after the nerfs happened to Armor Explosion, but it is still extremely mobile and it easily gets the job done with the little guys. It's tanky as all hell, and then for single target you just have an absolutely massively boosted Hammer of the Gods, changed into doing fire damage and built around igniting with that to turn what would normally be a very high cooldown but high burst damage skill into an even higher burst of damage that sustains itself a little bit even, using the ignite to boost the damage of the skill itself, because ignite itself has its actual damage done scale off of the damage of the hit that applies it. So applying an ignite through Hammer of the Gods, which has a massive hit, has the potential to scale to the moon with the right setup built around it. Next up then, let's talk about the Warbringer Ascendancy, the other choice for the warriors out there, and today I want to show you something different that I've seen pop up recently, which is a very heavily shockwave totem focused Warbringer build that does serious damage while still being extremely tanky. The main thing that it functions off of is the blood magic keystone that makes all mana costs be converted to life costs, building to be unbelievably tanky, and then getting as many bonus levels to melee skill modifiers as you can across all of your gear. Using Giant's Blood to let you wield two-handed weapons in one hand, you can get +7 on each of those using one in each hand, +2 on your gloves, and +3 on your amulet, for a total of 19 bonus skill levels, or a level 39 skill if it's otherwise a max level, and applying that to the shockwave totem itself. Then you've got the Warbringer Ascendancy nodes that buff totems in general, give you ancestral spirits that summon from your totems when you make them, and make your totems take a percentage of incoming damage instead of you, which lets you summon more totems without going through your entire health pool. It may not be the physically fastest moving build, but it's extremely offensively and defensively powerful, and it looks really cool too, in my opinion. Following that, let's move on to the Stormweaver, and generally at the very top we still have the classic Spark Archmage concept, which is just being improved more and more every time that we talk about it and check in. The idea of Archmage is that it scales bonus lightning damage added to your spells depending on the size of your maximum mana pool. Stormweaver naturally synergizes with this through Ascendancy nodes that give them permanent Arcane Surge, and then scale the effectiveness of Arcane Surge with your maximum mana pool. So by scaling maximum mana, you gain tons of damage, cast speed, and mana regen as a result. You then mix this with Mind Over Matter as a keystone, which lets you take damage from mana before life, some stack Energy Shield for its own purpose, or alternatively you can choose to play it risky and use the keystone passive that converts Energy Shield into bonus maximum mana, which is then even more bonus damage. This has been pushed more and more as people get better and better gear to drop for it, with things like the Ingenuity Belt, boosting the hell out of the effect of modifiers on your rings, which can then give you an unbelievably large boost on a good roll. And I know we talk about variations and updates to this build concept pretty frequently, but there's a reason for that, and it's because if you are playing Stormweaver and not using Archmage, you are basically shooting yourself in the foot before the race even starts. Next up then, we've got the Chronomancer Ascendancy as well, and this is a new further evolution of the Chronomancer Hammer of the Gods Stampede setup. Yes, this base idea is essentially what Titans are doing in their best builds, but putting a full Chronomancer spin on it, even more so after the latest changes to it. For general map clearing purposes, this uses Stampede and actually Herald of Ice now, taking advantage of the power of turning freezes into AoE explosions in a radius around dying enemies, putting a lot of cold damage on your weapon so that you can actually freeze enemies through Stampede, and then for bossing, it focuses heavily on Hammer of the Gods, turned into a fire damage skill with all of the ignite stuff that we talked about in the Titan section too. Except the main difference is where Titan focuses on making the one hit big enough to kill a boss by itself, Chronomancer gets to build a little bit differently, not only having an Ascendancy node that gives you a chance to not trigger the cooldown on skill use, but also having having the ascendancy skill that lets you manually reset all cooldowns, and with this you can spam multiple Hammer of the Gods in a row to really create some insane burst damage off of it too. After that we have the Witchhunter ascendancy, and I'm just still loving watching this plasma burst, shock burst rounds, and galvanic shard focused lightning crossbow build. The creator has recently started working in the Hand of Wisdom and Action unique gloves as well, which gives you increased attack speed depending on your dexterity, and increased lightning damage depending on your intelligence. If you then mix that with a bit of intelligence stacking across your gear, and in your passive point tree, you can also get a really big boost to your actual output just through flat lightning damage added from the gloves. Without building proper int first though, it will be hard to replicate what you're seeing here in this footage, as this is a very deliberate swap being made. The core of the build then is galvanic shards for mapping and general mob clearing, and then for bossing you use plasma burst wherever you have the opportunity for absolutely massive damage, and then shock burst rounds in between, which do bonus damage to enemies afflicted by a lightning based ailment. So the shock from plasma burst, and when the shock runs out, you reapply it through Stormcaller Arrow, which they've also got support gems in to make it apply lightning exposure, and then you continue your sustained fire of shock burst rounds until they happen to fall over. Next up we have Gemling Legionnaire, and holy fucking hell guys, this unholy creation cannot go further. This is the next stage of the Pillar of the Caged Gods, Hand of Wisdom and Action, stat stacking Gemling Legionnaire. The core of this setup is simply a unique weapon that gains damage based on your strength, attack speed based on your dexterity, and area of effect based on your intelligence, the Pillar of the Caged Gods. Then combining it with the Hand of Wisdom and Action unique gloves we just talked about, they give you attack speed based on your dexterity, and lightning damage based on your intelligence. Then stacking loads and loads of all attributes through things like the Astramentis unique amulet, which is just a nutty amount of all attributes, and this new variation basically just pushes much harder for the damage itself, but now taking advantage of the ridiculous interaction between Tempest Flurry and having high attack speed. Tempest Flurry as a skill has high forward momentum with its strikes in general, but the actual speed of that motion is dependent on your attack speed. So the higher your attack speed, the faster you can move while holding down Tempest Flurry. Combine that with the already nasty attack speed increase that you get from Pillar of the Caged God and Hand of Wisdom in Action scaling your dexterity into attack speed, and you can see just how silly this is going to end up looking. And of course it gets crazier every time I see it. Following that we have the Ranger, starting with the Deadeye Ascendancy, and yes, today we're here to talk about Fub Gun's Lightning Arrow, Lightning Rod setup once again, because it is simply the undeniably strongest Deadeye build that I have seen. However, it's actually gotten even stronger recently, specifically for mapping, as crazy as it is to say about a build that basically one-shots anything it sees before this too, but now it can chain that kill effect off screen entirely through a specific setup with both Herald of Ice and Herald of Thunder. These Herald skills are built in a way where they cannot trigger their own bonuses. Herald of Thunder cannot shock enemies, so you can't make it proc off of itself. Herald of Ice cannot freeze enemies, so you can't make it proc off of itself. But if you are running both Herald of Thunder and Herald of Ice, and you make Herald of Thunder do cold damage, give it cold infusion, glaciation for bonus freeze buildup, and then make Herald of Ice do lightning damage through lightning infusion and conduction, your Herald of Ice pops will shock enemies as they explode and kill them, which gives you stacks of Herald of Thunder, which will now freeze enemies, creating a potentially infinite chain of explosions once you get the ball rolling off on your own with your own damage itself. And that completely takes care of mapping. It makes it even faster for this build than it was before, and for bossing you obviously still have the absolutely insane combination of Lightning Rod just being spammed into an Orb of Storms. Next up then we have the Pathfinder Ascendancy, and I'm still currently mesmerized by this poisonous concoction build. Before this, most of what we'd seen coming from the Pathfinder was Gas Arrow, Vine Arrow, and Toxic Growth, but this build changed that up quite a fair bit. Yes, it's super deep endgame, but it refocuses it around the poisonous concoction itself, funneling a ton of skill levels to projectile skills to make it really have as much output as possible, walking through maps like it's nothing, bursting the hell out of bosses, and it's gotten some updates recently too, most notably adding in the Snakebite unique gloves, which make enemies able to be affected by one more of your poisons at a time, which then of course becomes two more through the Ascendancy node that doubles the amount of poisons you can have active on an enemy for a pretty big damage bonus. And this puts the build up to 10 maximum active poisons per enemy, which is an actually sort of crazy amount in total. Then of course adding in the Ingenuity unique belt, which boosts the modifier effects from your rings too, and using that with breach rings to scale some very hefty stat improvements as well. After this we've got the Invoker Ascendancy, and congratulations to Resurrect 2, who a couple of days back from now was the first person to hit level 100 in Path of Exile 2's early access, a massive achievement, and he did it as an Invoker, using what is still just a really fun build to watch move through the maps, as this was the main endgame that they engaged with. The core of the movement is the Temporalis unique, which reduces all skilled cooldowns by up to 4 seconds, and the Blink Sorceress Spirit skill, which replaces your dodge roll roll with a teleport. Normally doing this gives your dodge roll a cooldown so you can't teleport infinitely, but if you improve it with skill levels and quality and then add in the 4-second reduction from temporalis, you can actually hit a 0-second cooldown on blink, letting you teleport literally whenever you want to by pressing your dodge roll button. Then the core of the damage itself is cold damage applied through Stormwave to trigger shatters exceedingly quickly with the Pulsar Keln unique ring that lets you shatter chilled enemies as if they were frozen. Then funneling that through Herald of Ice, which creates massive explosions when you shatter enemies, which takes care of the map clear very much entirely. And then the classic high attack speed Tempest Flurry into Tempest Bell to proc its damage pulses as frequently as possible to just beat the crap out of bosses in single target scenarios. Following that, we have the Acolyte of Chayula ascendancy, and for once, we've actually got something that fits the class fantasy that is presented by this ascendancy, which is Poison Stormwave. This takes advantage, of course, of the Flames of Chayula part of the ascendancy for various general buffs, but then also the Reality Rending ascendancy node, which gives you a chance to gain a percentage of damage with hits as extra chaos damage, up to 100% bonus damage as chaos on the lowest chance roll. You then combine it with a high physical damage based quarterstaff. Stormwave converts 80% of the damage to lightning damage, but you still apply the physical damage, which has a chance to poison with each hit thanks to the Snake Bite unique gloves, which just make that happen for any of your physical attack skills. The chaos damage bonus procs can make the poison itself scale quite well too. Then the build works in the Call of the Brotherhood unique ring as a way to convert all lightning damage done into cold damage, and then it also works in Contagion to spread between enemies as you clear maps, and Dark Effigy for bosses or larger rares to deal bonus damage to enemies that are poisoned as well, generally giving you a real focus around chaos damage even while using quarterstaff skills as your main output. Then our final class is the Witch, starting with the Infernalist. The real top tier winner right now in high quality gear is SRS, or Summon Raging Spirits, created through spam flame wall casting, comboing that with Skeletal Snipers, which gets a damage boost from their projectiles going through the flame walls, and then they actually don't even take the maximum life into spirit conversion ascendancy nodes, using the Infernal Flame nodes instead of having a regular mana pool, and then Seething Body, which gives you and all minions a bonus 20% of your damage done as fire damage while you're on high Infernal Flame. And then of course the Hellhound to soak up damage instead of you, and Altered Flesh, which makes you take 20% of physical damage as chaos damage, which they are immune to through the Chaos Inoculation passive, and then you take 20% of cold and lightning damage as fire damage, which they boost their maximum fire resistance for up to a whopping 90%, which makes this build tanky as all hell, while also doing a ton of damage as well. Then finally we have the Blood Mage, and this is quite possibly the singular strongest build in the entirety of Path of Exile 2 at the moment. But don't kid yourself into thinking you can make it yourself though, because it takes advantage of Temporalis, the 200 divine cost unique body armor that reduces all cooldowns by up to 4 seconds, mixed with the Choir of the Storm's unique amulet, which triggers lightning bolt whenever you get a critical hit. Normally the amulet has an internal cooldown to prevent it triggering more than twice per second, and to stop it from chain proccing off of its own crits. However, Temporalis breaks the internal cooldown and removes it entirely, letting your lightning bolt crits cast more lightning bolts to the point of literally breaking the game and crashing instances if you go above 75% crit chance, according to Jung Groan, of course, the creator. The reason that this works particularly well with Blood Mage as an ascendancy, as opposed to any other, is a bit of extra synergy, raising the base crit chance of all spells up to 15%, giving you increased critical damage bonus as well, and then also creating life remnants in the Vitality Siphon Ascendance node, which lets you leech 10% of spell damage as life. You then use Blink with Cast on Dodge to cast Spark, a second Spark in Cast on Critical with Life Tap so that it takes your health instead of mana to keep you from running out when you crit, which then the Life Leech helps sustain instead, and then you just blink to get your first Spark crit, which then chains into infinite lightning bolts until whatever your target is falls over. If the chain ends and resets, you just have to blink again, and the damage will start all over. The damage is insane, the concept is nutty, and this is simply what peak performance looks like in this game right now. That just about does it for today, number one, another collection of the strongest current builds for each ascendancy at the moment. Of course, there is no way to just straight up measure power in a purely logical, numerical, mathematical way across the entire game, so this is the things that have looked the strongest out of everything that I have personally seen up to this point, with the hopes of showing everyone what the peak capabilities are for their ascendancy from the incredibly geared players in the deepest sections of the endgame in Path of Exile 2 at the moment. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.